2, 1.
7 things you probably didn't know you need to know. I'm Jamie East, and this is the Standout 7.
Over the next 7 minutes or so, we're going to look back on a week where the Wagatha Christie trial had the whole nation talking, the Met Police wrapped up their Partygate investigation, the cost of living continued to set records, and George Bush put his foot in it. This is the Standout 7 from the Smart 7. Don't forget to hit the follow button to get your daily updates at 7 a.m. The inflation rate in the UK has now hit 9%. That's the highest level since 1982, and Chancellor Rishi Sunak warned businesses on Wednesday that the next few months will be tough. The rising prices and the government's reluctance to introduce either an emergency budget or a windfall tax on energy companies were hot topics at Prime Minister's Question Time. Boris was firmly focused on the positive figures.
Of course, we will look at all sensible measures, Mr. Speaker, but we will be driven by considerations of growth, investment and employment. And I just remind you, Mr. Speaker, that unemployment's now hit a record low, or for 50 years, I should say.
Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says the government's going to have to act and that the continued delay in doing so is unforgivable.
Doesn't he see that every single day he delays his inevitable U-turn? He's going to do it. He's choosing to let people struggle when they don't need to.
Then, rather than explain his rationale for refusing to implement a windfall tax, Boris turned to a transphobic jibe instead.
I just remind the House that the right honourable gentleman struggled to define what a woman was. If he couldn't make up his mind on that point, Mr. Speaker, heaven help us.
Following calls for action on the impending food crisis from the UN and the US, Russia said it would only lift the blockade of Ukraine's Odessa port if sanctions on Russia were lifted in return. Meanwhile, more Ukrainian troops exited the Mariup steel plant, bringing the total to almost 2,000. It appears those who are not badly wounded are being taken to a Russian prison camp, but it remains unclear how many fighters still remain. And as the trial of the first Russian soldier accused of a war crime continued in Kyiv, the tank commander Vadim Shishimarin asked the widow of the man he shot for forgiveness. Volodymyr Zelensky spoke to Boris Johnson on Thursday about additional aid, even as the G7 voted a further $14 billion in loans and support as the country risks running out of cash as its current deficit is $5 billion a month. The president also had time to mock the latest Russian wonder weapon, a new laser system designed to shoot down drones.
This shows that they are afraid to admit that catastrophic mistakes have been made at the highest state and military levels in Russia.
Somebody else who's been on the phone apparently was George W. Bush, who spilled the beans on his call.
Ukrainian people elected Volodymyr Zelensky, with whom I Zoomed the other day, by the way. Cool little guy. The Churchill of the 21st century.
He also made the mother of all Freudian slips when speaking about Russia's Vladimir Putin.
The decision of one man to launch a wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of of Ukraine. Iraq. Anyway.
Tuesday saw Foreign Secretary Liz Truss announce that the government's planning legislation to overwrite parts of the post-Brexit trade deal within weeks to deal with the roadblock that's developed over the Northern Ireland Protocol.
Our shared objective has to be to find a solution that can command the broadest possible cross-community support for years to come and protect the Belfast Good Friday Agreement in all its dimensions. That is why I am announcing our intention to introduce legislation in the coming weeks to make changes in the protocol.
It was expected legislation could be introduced immediately, but it seems the government has blinked under pressure from its own party. The EU said it will respond with all measures at its disposal if the legislation goes ahead, but hasn't specifically threatened a trade war. Northern Ireland Secretary Brandon Lewis came under pressure for negotiating a deal that he now says isn't fit for purpose, but he says that's all down to the EU.
Well, it's acceptance of the reality that the European Union is insisting on a way of implementing the protocol that doesn't reflect actually what was agreed in the protocol.
Prime Minister Boris Johnson also seems keen to back away from the protocol that he too negotiated and signed off on.
Yes, I agreed it. I hoped and believed that our friends would not necessarily want to apply the protocol in quite the way that they have. As
suddenly as it began, the Met Police investigation into Partygate ended on Thursday. Acting Deputy Commissioner of the Met Police Helen Ball says it was a serious matter and that those involved ought to have known what they were doing was a breach.
We knew that we needed to see strong evidence if we were going to issue a fixed penalty notice, and we have seen that in 126 cases.
Prime Minister Boris Johnson, his wife Carrie and Chancellor Rishi Sunak all appear to have had just one penalty notice around the now infamous birthday cake celebration, even though the Prime Minister attended up to 6 of the events investigated. The Met Police's Helen Ball says the investigation was both thorough and impartial.
I think a number of people, members of the public, have been both surprised and concerned what they have heard, and I'm sure they will be surprised and concerned about the outcome of our investigation.
The conclusion of the Met Police investigation will now mean that the Sue Gray report can be published next week, but Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer, who's still awaiting the outcome of the Durham police investigation into Beergate, says he's not surprised at all by the results of the Met's work.
My view of the Prime Minister hasn't changed. Of course, after an investigation that shows 120 plus breaches of the law in Downing Street, of course he should resign. He's responsible for the culture.
Still to come on the Standout 7, Blackpool's Jake Daniels makes history, and there's a new doctor in the house. Right after this. Welcome back.
Thursday saw the final day in court of the Wagatha Christie libel trial. Barristers from both sides presented their summaries and closing arguments for the court case that's fascinated the nation. Colleen and Wayne Rooney weren't in court, and at one point, as Colleen's barrister was summing up, neither was Rebecca Vardy. Channel 4's Minnie Stevenson explains.
There was a moment when Colleen Rooney's barrister was giving his final word on the case, and Rebecca Vardy walks out with her laptop. Now, we don't know whether she was upset or because she needed to get a flat white. It's unclear why, but you could read into that. Perhaps she just had had enough.
The judge has reserved her judgment, which will come at some point during the summer. Jake Daniels made history on Monday. He's the UK's first professional footballer to come out as gay since 1990. He's only 17 and plays for Blackpool, and his announcement was praised by a wide range of people, including Boris Johnson, Harry Kane and Gary Lineker. He spoke to Sky Sports about his decision and how hard it is to cope with the stigma of being gay in male professional football. He's hoping his announcement will help to open doors for others.
I think because I'm younger, people can think, this kid's brave enough to do this, so I feel like I'll be able to, and I just want to do that for other people.
There's a brand new doctor in the house. It's Dr. Taylor Swift. Yep, she's not a medical doctor in case you were thinking of showing her your rash, but she did receive an honorary doctorate in fine arts from New York University. She joked that she was 90% sure she was only asked to attend because she had a song called 22. She spoke too about the best way to approach life.
Life can be heavy, especially if you try to carry it all at once. Part of growing up and moving into new chapters of your life is about catch and release. What I mean by that is knowing what things to keep and what things to release. You can't carry all things.
This has been the Standout 7, the best of the week from the Smart 7. We'll be back tomorrow, 7 a.m. with the Sunday 7. Have a great rest of your weekend. Written, produced and published by Daft Doris.